That sudden jolt when the car behind you honks, maybe a little longer than necessary, and you realize you drifted slightly over the line waiting to turn. Or perhaps it's finding that small, unexplained scratch along the passenger side door when you get back from the shops, and you honestly can't quite pinpoint when or how it happened. It's moments like these, even the seemingly tiny ones, that can plant a little seed of doubt, can't they? A fleeting thought of, was that me? Am I becoming less sharp behind the wheel? You're certainly not alone if you've had those moments. It's completely understandable, and it's something many of us experience as the years go by. And that's really what I wanted us to chat about today, navigating those changes that can happen with our driving as we get older. It's such an important topic, and often a sensitive one, because driving means so much more than just getting from A to B, doesn't it? It's our independence, our freedom to pop to the garden center when we fancy, visit the grandkids across town, or just get out of the house when we need a change of scenery. Losing that feels like a huge loss, and nobody wants to face that possibility. But talking about it openly, recognizing potential changes early on, isn't about giving up or admitting defeat. Far from it. It's actually about taking control. It's about ensuring our safety and the safety of everyone else on the road. It's about making informed choices that allow us to maintain our quality of life and peace of mind. It's not about reaching a certain number on a birthday cake. Age itself isn't the deciding factor. We all know incredibly sharp drivers well into their later years. Instead, it's about honestly looking at how we feel and how we perform behind the wheel. It's about being proactive rather than waiting for something significant, perhaps even frightening, to happen that forces the issue. Thinking ahead gives us options and keeps us in the driver's seat of our own lives, even if we eventually decide to hand over the car keys. So, over the next little while together, let's explore some of those common signs that perhaps our driving abilities might be changing. We'll touch upon what these indicators might look like in everyday situations. Consider the feelings that can come up around this. And importantly, think about positive, practical ways to approach this whole subject with honesty and care for ourselves. It's about empowering ourselves with awareness. One of the most straightforward, though sometimes hard to acknowledge, signs is noticing an increase in minor accidents or traffic violations. Now, I'm not talking about a major collision necessarily, though that's obviously a critical event. I mean those smaller incidents, the fender benders in the supermarket car park, clipping a wing mirror, maybe scraping a wheel rim on the curb more often than you used to. Think about those little bumps, maybe tapping the garden wall when reversing, or misjudging the space when parking and ending up just a bit too close to the next car. It's easy to brush them off, isn't it? Oh, just a silly mistake, or that other driver came out of nowhere. And sometimes that's true. But if you find these silly mistakes are happening more frequently, even if they seem inconsequential on their own, it could signal that something deeper is shifting. Perhaps reaction times are slowing just a fraction, or maybe judging distances isn't quite as instinctive as it once was. It's like my friend Arthur told me recently. He noticed he'd had 2 very minor scrapes in the local multi-story car park within about 6 months. Neither was serious, just paint transfer really. But he said, honestly, he couldn't quite remember doing the second one. That lack of awareness, coupled with the repetition, was what made him start thinking. Similarly, getting pulled over by the police for things like rolling through a stop sign you didn't quite see in time, or perhaps getting a warning for driving a bit too slowly and holding up traffic. These aren't just annoyances. They can be objective feedback that your driving habits might be becoming less safe or predictable for other road users. Taking these incidents seriously, as potential indicators rather than isolated bits of bad luck, is a really important first step in self-awareness. Does that kind of pattern sound familiar to anyone? It doesn't mean immediate panic, but it does warrant some honest reflection. Building on that idea, another significant area to pay attention to is struggling with the basic, fundamental tasks of driving, things that used to be completely automatic. This can manifest in various ways. Perhaps you've noticed it takes more conscious effort now to stay perfectly centered in your lane, especially on faster roads or around bends. Maybe you find yourself drifting towards the edge line or the center line without realizing it until you correct. It might feel like the car isn't going quite where you intend it to, requiring more concentration than before. Think about merging into traffic, maybe onto a busy dual carriageway. Does that feel more challenging than it used to? Finding the right gap, judging the speed of oncoming vehicles, accelerating smoothly to blend in. These complex tasks can become noticeably harder if cognitive processing or reaction speed has slowed even slightly. Or consider the pedals. Have you ever had a moment, even a brief one, of hesitation about which pedal is which? Or found yourself braking a little too sharply, or accelerating more abruptly than you intended, perhaps making your passengers jump? These might seem like small slips, but difficulty with these core mechanical operations is a definite warning sign. It could indicate issues with physical coordination, sensory feedback, or the mental processing needed to drive safely. Making sudden lane changes without properly checking mirrors or the blind spot also falls into this category. It suggests a potential decline in awareness or the physical ability to check thoroughly. And that difficulty with thoroughly checking mirrors and blind spots sometimes connects closely to another area that can be quite unsettling. Experiencing problems with navigation and finding your way, especially in places you thought you knew, like the back of your hand. It's one thing to get a bit lost exploring a new city. We've all done that. But it's quite another feeling when you suddenly find yourself unsure of the route to your local library, or you take a wrong turn heading to a friend's house you've visited countless times. It can be genuinely disorienting, can it? Maybe you miss your usual motorway exit, or find yourself driving towards the supermarket when you actually meant to go to the post office. Sometimes it might manifest as arriving at the right place, but maybe at the wrong time, or even on the wrong day, feeling a bit confused about your schedule. I remember my aunt telling me about a time she was driving to her weekly bridge club, a route she'd taken for over 20 years. Suddenly, halfway there, she found herself on an unfamiliar road, completely unsure how she'd gotten off track or how to get back. She had to pull over and call her son for directions. She felt flustered and honestly a bit embarrassed by it. She said it wasn't just about being lost physically. It was the feeling of her internal compass suddenly going haywire. These kinds of navigational difficulties, particularly in familiar territory, can sometimes be an early indicator of cognitive changes that might impact the complex task of driving. It's not just about memory. Driving involves constantly processing information, making decisions, and anticipating what's next. Skills that can be affected if our cognitive function isn't quite as sharp as it once was. That moment of disorientation can be quite frightening when you're behind the wheel, responsible for navigating safely. Of course, alongside these more direct driving skill issues, there are often changes in our own feelings and behaviors around driving that tell a story. Many older drivers are incredibly perceptive about their own changing abilities, even if they don't consciously articulate it, and they start to self-regulate. This is actually a very responsible thing to do. Have you noticed yourself doing this? Maybe you find yourself avoiding driving at night because the glare from headlights seems much worse than it used to, or perhaps dusk makes it harder to judge distances. Maybe you steer clear of motorways or busy dual carriageways now, preferring quieter local roads even if it takes longer. Heavy traffic or complex junctions might feel increasingly stressful or overwhelming, leading you to plan your trips meticulously to avoid peak times. It could also be more subtle. Perhaps you find yourself making excuses when someone suggests you drive. "Oh, let's take your car. It's more comfortable." Or, "My back's a bit stiff today." Or maybe you feel a distinct sense of relief when your spouse or a friend offers to take the wheel. Some people find they just don't enjoy driving as much anymore, feeling more tense or anxious behind the wheel than relaxed and confident. They might grip the steering wheel tighter or find themselves focusing so intently on the road ahead that they miss turns or road signs. Driving significantly slower than the surrounding traffic, not just out of caution, but perhaps out of uncertainty, can also be a sign. While self-regulation is often sensible, these behavioral changes signal an underlying awareness, either conscious or subconscious, that driving feels different, perhaps more challenging, than it once did. Acknowledging these feelings, rather than dismissing them, is important. It's your own intuition, perhaps giving you a gentle nudge that things are changing. And then there's the physical evidence that can sometimes accumulate, almost unnoticed, until you take a closer look. I mentioned those small scratches or dents earlier. Have you ever walked out to your car and noticed a new scrape on the bumper, or maybe a dent near the wheel arch, and had absolutely no recollection of how it got there? Or perhaps you've noticed damage near your driveway. Maybe a gate post has been scraped. The edge of the lawn looks a bit flattened, or a flower bed near where you park seems to have been inadvertently driven over. These small incidents can add up over time. Sometimes, it might be things others notice first. Perhaps a family member points out that one of your brake lights is out, or an indicator light is broken, and you hadn't realized, or maybe they comment that you don't seem to be using your turn signals as consistently as you used to. Another physical clue can be observing the driver themselves. Is it becoming physically difficult to turn your head and shoulders sufficiently to check your blind spot properly before changing lanes or pulling out? That stiffness in the neck or shoulders, perhaps from arthritis or other conditions, can directly impact driving safety if it prevents those crucial visual checks. These bits of physical evidence, whether on the car or related to the driver's physical movement, often paint a picture when viewed together, suggesting that the precise control and awareness needed for safe driving might be diminishing. That difficulty physically turning to really get a good look over your shoulder is important, because safe driving relies so heavily on being fully aware of your surroundings, doesn't it? And this connects closely to another crucial area: cognitive warning signs. Now, cognitive might sound like a technical term, but really, it just means those thinking processes. Things like attention, concentration, decision-making, and reacting quickly. When these abilities start to change, even subtly, it can significantly impact driving safety. For instance, have you ever found yourself approaching a familiar junction and suddenly realizing you almost missed the stop sign? Or maybe a passenger has had to gently point out that the traffic light ahead turned red a moment ago and you hadn't quite registered it. These lapses in attention, especially regarding critical signals and signs, are a major red flag. It's not necessarily about deliberately ignoring them. It's often that the brain just isn't processing that visual information as quickly or effectively as it used to. It might feel like things are happening just a bit too fast to keep up with sometimes. Similarly, finding yourself feeling increasingly nervous, confused, or simply overwhelmed in busy traffic situations can be a cognitive indicator. Think about navigating a complex roundabout with multiple lanes and exits, or trying to merge onto a fast-flowing motorway during rush hour. If these situations now feel significantly more stressful and mentally taxing than they once did, leaving you feeling flustered or unsure of what to do next, it's worth paying attention to that feeling. Driving requires managing a lot of information simultaneously, watching other cars, reading signs, anticipating pedestrians, monitoring your speed, navigating. And if that mental juggling act starts to feel overwhelming, it can lead to hesitation or poor decisions. Difficulty concentrating on the driving task itself is another sign. Maybe you find your mind wandering more easily, or you get easily distracted by conversations in the car, the radio, or even just your own thoughts. Safe driving demands focused attention. If you find yourself missing turns because you were preoccupied, or not noticing a car braking ahead because your focus drifted, that's a concern. There are also more unusual signs, like occasionally stopping at a green light as if unsure, or getting momentarily confused by the sequence of traffic signals. These instances often point towards challenges in processing information correctly and making the appropriate split-second decisions that driving requires. Demonstrating poor judgment in traffic, perhaps pulling out into a gap that's too small, misjudging the speed of an oncoming car, or following too closely, even if you get away with it, can signal that the ability to accurately assess risk is declining. These cognitive signs might start subtly, but they have the potential to become very dangerous over time. And of course, alongside driving performance and cognitive changes, our overall health plays a huge role in our ability to drive safely. Certain health conditions and even the medications we take can have a direct impact. Vision is perhaps the most obvious one. As we get older, many of us experience changes in our eyesight. Conditions like cataracts can cause glare, especially at night, making oncoming headlights really difficult to handle. Glaucoma can affect peripheral vision, that ability to see things out of the corner of your eye, which is so crucial for spotting hazards. Macular degeneration can impact central vision, making it harder to read road signs or see details clearly. Even if you wear glasses, regular eye tests are so important. Specifically, asking your optician about your fitness to drive, as vision can change gradually without you fully noticing the extent of it. Difficulty judging distances, seeing clearly in low light, or noticing pedestrians or cyclists can all stem from vision problems. Hearing loss is another factor. While we rely heavily on sight, our hearing also provides important cues. The sound of an ambulance or police siren approaching, another driver's horn, or even unusual noises from our own car that might signal a problem. If hearing has declined significantly, it might delay reaction to these vital auditory warnings. It's definitely something to discuss with your doctor or an audiologist, as hearing aids can make a big difference for many people. Then there are specific medical conditions that are known to affect driving ability. Conditions like dementia or Alzheimer's disease directly impact cognitive functions essential for driving. Memory, judgment, reaction time, spatial awareness. Parkinson's disease can affect motor control, coordination, and reaction speed. Severe arthritis, particularly in the hands, neck, shoulders, or knees, can make steering, braking, or checking blind spots physically difficult or painful. If you've had a stroke, Recovery can sometimes leave lasting physical or cognitive effects that impact driving. Even conditions like diabetes need careful management, as a sudden drop in blood sugar, hypoglycemia, can cause dizziness, confusion, or even loss of consciousness. The crucial thing with any significant health condition is to have an honest conversation with your doctor specifically about how it might affect your driving safety, now and potentially in the future. They can offer guidance based on your individual circumstances, and we absolutely have to mention medications. So many of us take medications regularly for various conditions, and some of these can have side effects that impair driving. Common culprits include certain painkillers, especially opioids, sleeping pills, anti-anxiety medications, some antidepressants, muscle relaxants, and even some allergy or cold remedies that cause drowsiness. Side effects like dizziness, blurred vision, slowed reaction time, or difficulty concentrating can make driving incredibly hazardous. It's vital to read the labels carefully, look for warnings about operating machinery, and always talk to your doctor or pharmacist about the potential impact of any new medication, or even a change in dosage, on your ability to drive safely. Never assume that because a medication is prescribed or available over the counter, it's automatically safe for driving. Chronic pain itself, even separate from medication, can also be a significant factor, acting as a constant distraction or limiting the physical movements needed for safe control of the vehicle. It's a lot to consider, isn't it? Thinking about how our health, or the treatments we need, might affect something as fundamental as driving. And when you add those considerations to the potential changes in driving skills or confidence we've been talking about, those near misses, the navigation hiccups, the dents that appear out of nowhere, it can start to feel quite heavy. It's completely understandable to feel a bit anxious or even resistant when these thoughts surface. After all, driving represents so much for so many of us. It's deeply tied to our sense of self, our ability to stay connected, and our day-to-day freedom. The idea of that changing can stir up some powerful emotions, maybe frustration, sadness, or even a bit of fear about what comes next. You're certainly not alone if those feelings resonate, but recognizing these signs, having this awareness, isn't about dwelling on the negative. It's actually about safety, first and foremost. As we get older, our bodies naturally become a bit more fragile. Minor accidents that might have just shaken us up a bit when we were younger can unfortunately lead to more serious injuries now. So, being honest about potential driving challenges is a crucial step in protecting ourselves. And of course, it's also about protecting others on the road, passengers, pedestrians, other drivers. It's a responsibility we all share when we get behind the wheel. Looking at it proactively, before a serious incident forces the issue, is truly an act of care for everyone involved. And while the fear of losing independence is incredibly real and valid, sometimes thinking ahead and making a plan can actually preserve independence in a different way. If driving has become genuinely stressful, anxiety-provoking, or physically difficult, continuing to push through might actually be limiting your life. You might avoid going places because the drive feels too daunting, or feel constantly on edge when you do venture out. Letting go of the driving stress, when the time is right, can sometimes free up mental and emotional energy. It allows you to focus on how you'll get where you want to go, rather than worrying if you can get there safely behind the wheel. It opens the door to exploring other options, maybe rediscovering local buses or community transport services, utilizing taxi services or ride shares more strategically, or perhaps leaning a little more on friends and family, which can actually strengthen social connections. Planning for these alternatives before you absolutely have to stop driving gives you control and choice in the transition. Of course, this often brings up the driving conversation, which can be one of the most challenging discussions within families. Perhaps you're the one noticing changes in yourself and wondering how to talk about it with your loved ones. Or maybe it's your adult child or spouse who has gently, or perhaps not so gently, expressed concerns. These conversations are often loaded with emotion on both sides. It's easy for the older driver to feel judged, criticized, or like their autonomy is being threatened. And then it's equally difficult for family members who are usually acting out of genuine love and concern, but might not know how to approach the topic sensitively. It often helps if the focus stays on safety and well-being, rather than blame or capability. Using I statements like, "I've been feeling worried when," rather than, "You always do this," can make a difference. Framing it as a shared goal. How can we work together to make sure you stay safe and connected? Can also be more productive. It requires patience, empathy, and understanding from everyone involved. It's a process, not usually a single conversation. And acknowledging when it might be time to stop driving, while difficult, does bring significant benefits. There's the immense peace of mind that comes from knowing you've removed a potential source of danger for yourself and others. That reduction in anxiety can be profound, especially if driving had become a source of constant worry. It also provides the crucial opportunity to thoughtfully arrange for alternative transportation, ensuring you can still get to appointments, see friends, and do the things you enjoy. It allows for a dignified transition on your own terms, rather than having the decision made for you by an accident, a medical emergency, or intervention from licensing authorities. Making that choice yourself, proactively, is empowering. Now, it's important to be realistic about the challenges too. Research does show that stopping driving can sometimes lead to feelings of isolation or depression for some individuals, especially if good alternatives aren't readily available. This is why planning is so vital. Exploring transportation options early, connecting with local senior centers or community groups that might offer resources or social activities, and maintaining strong social ties become even more important during this transition. It's also true that giving up the keys can feel like a significant loss of identity for some. Allowing yourself time to adjust and acknowledging those feelings is perfectly okay. Remember, many people resist giving up driving even when the signs are clear, precisely because it represents so much. Having support from family, friends, or even a counselor can be helpful during this adjustment period. Looking ahead, things are evolving. There's a growing understanding that fitness to drive is about functional ability, not just age. We're seeing more driver evaluation programs becoming available, offering objective assessments. And yes, technology might play a role. Advanced driver assistance systems in newer cars might help some people drive safely for longer. Although they aren't a magic bullet, we're also seeing more focus on developing senior-friendly transportation options in many communities, though there's still a long way to go, especially in more rural areas. The conversation is shifting towards more personalized assessments rather than broad, age-based rules, which is a positive step. So, as we've been chatting about, paying attention to these different areas, the small incidents, changes in how you handle the car, shifts in your confidence or behavior, navigation issues, and the impact of your health. It all helps paint a clearer picture. It's about honest self-assessment, ongoing awareness, and being open to adapting as needed. It's not about finding fault, but about ensuring safety and maintaining the best possible quality of life. Remember to be kind to yourself through this process. It's a significant life adjustment for many. Every small step towards awareness and planning is a positive one. You are the expert on your own experience, and having this information hopefully empowers you to make the choices that are right for you, ensuring you stay safe, connected, and in control of your journey. Whether you're behind the wheel or exploring new ways to navigate the road ahead. What have your experiences been with this? Perhaps you have tips or thoughts about navigating driving changes or finding good transportation alternatives. Please feel free to share your insights in the comments below. Your experiences could be incredibly helpful to others in our community here. And if you found our conversation today helpful or thought-provoking, please do give the video a like. It really helps others find it. And consider subscribing if you'd like more conversations focused on living well and navigating the changes and opportunities that come after 60. Take good care, everyone, and here's to making every day a little brighter and safer.